Well, Jesus spoke to his disciples and gave them just incredible knowledge and information about, as well as examples of how to live life, as well as offering to them through his own body and his death, ultimate gifts of salvation. These words come from the chapter in Matthew that the men's Bible study shared with one another this week. It has to do with money. And what Jesus says to his disciples and anyone listening, and hear this, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. And we had a long discussion about whether money in itself is evil. And we concluded very quickly that it's not the money that produces unkind, evil, and harmful and hateful kinds of decisions, but it's money that can be used when it is given with love and compassion and kindness. And this is what Jesus goes on to say. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust consumes and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. These last words in his comment, I think, are so incredibly powerful. We have said that this is a congregation and a denomination that believes in an open heart and not a frozen heart, a heart that's open compassionately to all people and to all needs. And that with an open heart, we can then have open minds to see the possibilities of how we can minister and serve others on behalf of Jesus. And when that happens, we discover that we can engage each other all across the globe and in our communities, on our neighborhoods, on the lakes, on the rivers, on the highways, wherever we are. We can be open to them as brothers and sisters in what we understand to be God's holy family. Hans Sallet, anyone know that name? Hans Sallet had an old and really remarkably decrepit resort. It was ancient, but people loved it because it smelled of the nostalgia of a long time ago. It was a resort with about 6 old log cabins on Lake Minocqua, of all places. That resort came to Hans as a result of the death of his father and mother. Father committed suicide, had come to America, the father had, to western Minnesota, established a German-speaking newspaper to serve many of the little communities along the border of South Dakota and Minnesota who had come from Germany. And then the First World War broke out. And there was, as we discovered also in the Second World War, some anxiety about the loyalty of these new immigrants. And so he was forced to stop printing it in English and had to give an English translation to the sheriff and to others to read it to make sure that he wasn't an enemy of the country. After a while, he sold the paper, moved to Minocqua, bought a bunch of land that was available to him at a very low price on Lake Minocqua. Can you believe that? And he then began to build a resort. He built it by hand, all the logs, all the roofing, all of the piers, and he had customers coming to this nostalgic place. It was still going when I served as the minister of the Methodist Church in Minocqua, and Hans Sallet had many of the summer people who came from Wapaka and from Chicago and from Nashville and from wherever else they may have been, particularly from Wausau. I jokingly said on many occasions, there can't be anybody left in Wausau. They're all up in Hazelhurst and Minocqua and Manitowish Waters and Mercer. Well, it turns out that Hans's father and mother and he and his brother attended a very, very conservative Lutheran church in our community. And when the father committed suicide, the church minister said, "We won't bury him." Milton Leisman, who was the minister of this church and the church down in Minocqua, as is often the case for me and other ministers within the United Methodist Church, people who are either unchurched or who are struggling to know where to go to feel free and to feel accepted and warmth, will oftentimes ask us to baptize or to marry or to bury. So Milt Leisman did the burial. He was there for 14 years as the minister of the two churches here and there. And by the way, began to start and help the Manitowish Waters Community Church get started. It would have been Methodist, except he was against drinking. And there was a resort owner who had a fairly substantial bar at his resort, and he was not about to have the church be a Methodist church, and so it became Presbyterian. And then his mother died, and the mother likewise, who had stopped going to church because she was so unhappy with the minister who wouldn't bury her husband, wouldn't be buried again by that church. And so Milt Leisman buried her. Now, I didn't know all this story until Hans Sallet was in the hospital after I had left to become director of a mental health program in Rhinelander. And he said to Ray Robinson, who had been the minister of this church and helped out, but particularly of the church in Minocqua, can you find Irv Teichmiller? I got to talk to him about my resort. Now here's the catch. He had a will and was going to give the resort to the Winnebago State Mental Health Hospital because he had had a major psychiatric breakdown. But he wanted to know if they would provide the people who were staying at the hospital an opportunity to stay at his resort and get well. And I said, I don't think so, but you can check with them to see if they'll do. He said, well, if it's not going to work, I know you're in mental health now. Would you talk to my attorney? I want to change my will and we want to give it to the church, and the church needs to form a foundation, and the foundation needs to serve people who are struggling emotionally. The reason I tell you this story is that this was a man who had been cared for lovingly by his community. During the time he was in the hospital, his brother tried to take the resort away from him. But our state of Wisconsin and the county of Oneida said, no, that can't be done. It is in his official ownership. Unless he is declared incompetent when he leaves this clinic, this hospital, it is still his, and they protected him. So what he did was to ask me to go to his attorney and rewrite his will. Anybody want me to do that for you? I know how to do it. The will was then made out so that it would go to a yet unestablished foundation, which we quickly, with Vic we met and a couple of others who were part of that church down in Minocqua, we were able, with the attorney, to create a foundation. And that foundation still exists today. And I'm grateful that I get to be president of that foundation and to give out scholarships and to give grants to various agencies that can do information and healthy parenting and other kinds of training for people. It gives out grants to those who are going to graduate school, who want to help people who are struggling emotionally. We had a visit last evening with our granddaughter who works as a PA in Madison, in Columbus, my hometown, in Baraboo. The Wilsons, double L Wilsons, live in Baraboo. She said to me, I mentioned your name to our program in Baraboo whenever we receive somebody who's going through a psychotic break because of problems with their medication or something that's happened to them. I said, we need someone to talk these folks down. She said, a man came in and said to me, I'm here to kill you. And she said to me, I needed you then. I needed you because I know you would have found ways to talk this person down and get them into the hospital so they could be stabilized. You see, Hans Sallet wanted very much to go beyond his life on earth. Not only did he know, based on what I shared with him, that though he had not been going to church because he'd been angry, God loved him. And God would know that, and God would understand the pain and the suffering he had gone through, and his father and mother had gone through. And that when he died, I would indeed ask God to receive his spirit into his kingdom. And it seems to me a reasonable assumption, if we are Christians, that God doesn't just reject us because we've had difficulty, and God surely doesn't reject us if we have some doubts. And if we ask questions, no, God says, as a good and kind and gentle parent would, we are patient. God is patient, will understand. The man on the cross beside Jesus, who moments earlier was mocking Jesus, along with those who were standing there and saying, yeah, he can heal others, but he won't heal himself. He has the power to do it. And this man said, when you enter your kingdom, will you remember me? And I told him that story, and I said, I know that Jesus and God will remember you and will receive you into your kingdom. Now, I'm so delighted to be part of this congregation, and please, I don't do this as a brag, I do it as an indication, as Paul did frequently, saying how wonderful the churches were, that they took care of themselves, but they also took care of others. The message of the early church, about the early church by the non-church people was, whoa, do they love one another? I'm so grateful that we have met John Munson. Because what John has said to me, as he said to you if you've heard him speak, and he's going to be here again, hopefully at this summer, he and his wife were at a workshop and they were thinking about their future in retirement. And it turned out that both of them had always wished to be a missionary. And when they discovered that, they decided they would do a special mission in a spot on earth that's tiny and insignificant except for the people who live there. Aurora, Ghana. And for a ton of years now, this man who taught at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, and taught health and wellness, is continuing with he and his wife Barb to encourage others to reach out beyond themselves. Jesus, when he met with the disciples for the last meal that he would have with them, the Last Supper, the Eucharist, communion, said to them, when you do this, remember me. Remember what I've said. Remember what I've done. Remember the death that I have given on behalf of all people who are struggling. And remember that you are special. You are a beloved community of people who want to serve and care and respond and be compassionate in a world that is oftentimes insensitive, uncaring, and builds up fortunes that will end when they die. So, John said to us, we have a need for an orphanage, and we'd like someone to go and help us build it. And we need resources to build it because they can't afford an orphanage. And if we don't build an orphanage, these little boys and girls will be taken into some kind of slavery or they'll die. Thank you. 2 of our folks said, we'll be there. And they went and spent the 10, 11, 12 days in Ghana and had an incredible eye-opening experience, came back and told us about it, and we have given. And what has been so exciting for us is that whenever there has been an invitation to give, or sometimes not even an invitation, a question being raised, you have responded. It's a blessing. The giving is a blessing, and indeed it is true that when you give, 2 people are blessed and 2 people experience joy. It is the joy that comes from the gift to the person, but the joy that you feel when you give. Will you come up and tell us about the letter from the nurses, please? Bethany is a former nurse, and she loves nursing.
And so this year, about each month, one of us retired nurses from the congregation has written a letter of encouragement to the student nurses in Aurora, Ghana. And so then I've gotten back, I just sent Cookie's letter, and Winifred Abagaya sends us this. We are always blessed to have all of you in our lives. Your support and encouragement and prayers always keeps us moving as student nurses. Thank you and God bless you. We promise to be the best nurses you always wish us to be. Love you all, and it's our dream to come and serve you too one day, because nothing can repay the Thanksgiving we owe you. So that's her letter.
That's who we are. That is who we are. Where your heart is, there is your treasure as well. And your treasure in this congregation and in other congregations all across the globe who respond to the needs of people who are struggling, who hope for a new and different life, and who want to understand how they fit in this universe in which we live. Do you know that it takes $1,000 for an orphan student who has no resources, no family left, in the orphanage that's now been built? $1,000 to put a student in high school. John tells me there is a student, and that student needs support. We recently heard that there's a nurse that has, or a young woman who has a degree, a high school and early college degree, and she wants to be a doctor. Now, a doctor, she probably would not be able to qualify right away in America because of the higher standards, but in Africa, a 3-year degree in medicine gives her a doctoral degree, and she can be a doctor in Aurora or some other place. And we sent $1,000 to finish her entry into the university that's going to teach her how to be a doctor. Gosh, think about it. Think about it. And the question is, why didn't somebody respond? And then the person said, whoa, wait a minute, I'm the somebody. I'm the somebody. And the somebody who can feel great joy and happiness over the fact that, yes, we have made a very good living in our life. And yes, we are struggling, but we have a little bit we can give, and we can combine it with what others are doing. One last thing. I met with a group of ministers a couple of weeks ago in this new district down in the Minocqua Church of the Pines. And I'd had this idea, and I mentioned it to the ad council, that I was going to see if I could find other churches within our denomination, each of which would give $750 out of special offerings. And we'll combine those $750 to become $7,500 and send it to UMCOR, which is the Methodist Committee on Relief, and that money will go to African University that has been established through the efforts of the United Methodist Church, and a young African man or woman who wants to be a minister will be able to become one. Full-fledged scholarship at Methodist University, African University, Theological Seminary, organized and made happen by United Methodist people who said, I hear the need, I'm the somebody, I will respond. I think we can do it. I think I've got 3 churches already who have said they'll make a contribution. I'm contacting others. And if we can get $7,500, we will be able to train a minister. The need is there. There are so many other things that need to be done here in our own community, and we're doing them, and abroad. Your heart is indeed where your treasure is. And if your treasure is in serving the Lord, in responding to Jesus to feed my sheep, to care for my lambs, if your heart is where Jesus said to his disciples, do the things that will bring joy and hope to others. So he responds to the mentally ill, chained outside of the village. He responds to the man who's lame. He responds to the Roman centurion who would have killed his countryman, but whose daughter was dying, and so many more. Someone said that I want to quote, I've known power, but the power of sharing your resources with another person, sharing your meal with someone who's hungry, the power of sharing your resources with someone who needs hope and life. That's power. The power of love, the power of gift giving, and the power of joy. That's our power. Comes from our Lord, and we are grateful. Amen.